Hello everyone and welcome to a quick look at a game I created called Run Run. My name is Kasanas. Guys, this was kind of a rough week here. I've got two girls and they have been arguing constantly. I didn't have a lot of time to create a video and I'm sorry about that. What I did do, however, is I created a fast game, a quick game. It took me about 2 or 3 days working on and off, obviously. Working mostly with my free time whenever the girls weren't arguing. And what I decided to create was a side-scrolling infinite runner. One that occurred at the same time, a co-op side-scrolling infinite runner. And it was supposed to allow my girls to work together so they'd stop arguing for a few minutes. And I'd just like to go over what went into making a game like this and the thought process behind game design and then game development. A lot of people don't understand the difference between the two. And I'd like to talk a little bit today, very quickly, about this game and the thought process that went into it. All right, let's get started. When first designing Run Run, or first coming up with the idea for Run Run, I really needed something. I had some very particular constraints that I had to work within. I was building a game for 2 children. I was building a game in a very short time span. I was building a game that we had limited resources for as far as computers were concerned. All of these things where it went into the idea of the design. These were all the constraints that I was working within. You have to understand the problems that you have before you can begin design. You have to understand what you want out of your game before you can even start to think about the actual design or the development of your game. So identifying the problem was extremely important. In this particular case, the problem was 2 children who were stuck at home, arguing constantly. And I wanted something that was going to bring them together. This was my goal. This is my problem. I wanted something that was going to bring them together, that wasn't going to cause additional arguments. I wanted to include them in the game. This is going to actively make them more interested in the game itself by looking at themselves as the heroes. These are all things that I gave consideration to. I didn't give consideration to the narrative behind this particular game. This is not a narrative-based game. The core mechanic of this game is obviously jumping. So I didn't really care about the narrative. I was going to come up with all of that later. What I wanted was something that was co-op within the constraints that I had. So split screen co-op was the easiest to do. I didn't have to worry about networking. I could do it very, very quickly. So that right away decided that I was going to have limited screen space within whatever it is I was doing. Coming up with the idea of a side-scrolling infinite runner kind of was a no-brainer when it came to the idea of having to have this limited space and a simplistic game. It's a one-button game. So with those two things in mind, I was going to be creating myself a side-scrolling infinite runner, split screen. I then decided on how this game was going to be co-op. I didn't want it to be a race. I didn't want it to be something like they were competing against each other because that was going to lead to more arguments. And I just can't take any more arguments in this house right now. We're jammed in here with this pandemic and it's not fun. So I decided on a co-op style game where they would collect something and these somethings would lead to a cumulative score, a cumulative score. They'd be working together in order to create the high score. That's all they're doing is they're not going for distance or anything else with this game. I decided all they were going to do was going to build that high score. In deciding it was going to be an infinite runner, a side-scrolling infinite runner, there's a handful of mechanics that I knew would be in there at that point in time, and this is from past experience, right? This is from the history of this genre. We know that there's going to be the ability to run, the ability to jump, the ability to collect things, and the ability to have the game end due to a mistake in traversal. And again, like I said, traversal, particularly jumping, is the core mechanic in this game. I'm also offering in this game a double jump. So there was a jump as a core mechanic, a double jump as a secondary mechanic, collection as a secondary mechanic. All of these things went into the game itself. Further in my design thinking, I didn't, again, want to isolate these 2 players. I didn't want it to be 2 separate games. Instead, I wanted them working towards something and being able to affect each other in some way. So I already had the co-op and the fact that they had a communal score. What I wanted was the ability to affect each other. I wanted the ability to have an effect on each other's gameplay as well. So it just wasn't 2 separate games that they were playing completely. What I decided to add in was a mechanic that would affect both players if one of the players picked it up. And in this particular case, I decided on camera control. Very, very simplistic. Very, very simplistic. If the players pick up a particular pickup, then the cameras will rotate. And originally my thinking was they would rotate 90 degrees at a time until it eventually rotated back to the original position. So these were the constraints, these were the ideas that I had that I wanted to go into my design. I had no narrative ideas yet, nothing like that. I simply had the core mechanic, which was important. I understood that the aesthetic of gameplay was going to be challenged, that the players were going to want to get better at this game, and they were going to challenge themselves to do it better each time. I understood the secondary mechanics. With all of these tools ready for me, I was ready to start to prototype this particular design. I started off right away with the secondary mechanic of camera flipping. I didn't start with the core mechanic. I knew historically that through other games like this that the jumping itself would be fun, the collection would be fun. The only thing that I was really doing that was different in this particular game was the ability to flip the camera. When it comes to rapid prototyping, that's exactly what you're doing. You're not building the entire game and then seeing if it works. You are building small snippets of the game and you are rapidly making changes to it. You're iteratively changing your ideas. That's exactly what I did with the camera flip. So I started off with the ability to rotate the camera 90 degrees, and afterwards I realized very, very quickly that it wasn't fun. In fact, the amount of movement that I originally had made the game very, very confusing. And obviously that's not what I wanted. I'm trying to create a game that's going to allow for harmony within this house at this point in time. So originally when the camera flipped, it would flip 90 degrees, and rather than being a top and bottom style couch co-op like you see here, where the cameras are split screen along the horizontal, I needed to change between horizontal and vertical so that I had enough play space so that the people could see what was in front of them, so the players could see what was coming up. Obviously, if you can't see the platforms that are coming, you can't make decisions, you can't make informed decisions, and without those informed decisions within your game, it's no longer going to be fun. All right, player choice, player knowledge is extremely important in games like this, and in any game, for that matter. So I needed the screens to be able to slide around, not only rotate, but the cameras to be able to slide around, so that I went from a horizontal split screen to a vertical split screen. And I quickly prototyped this, and I didn't like the way it worked. It worked fine. I was able to move the cameras around. I was able to rotate the camera. And everything worked fine, but it took a few moments each time that I rotated the camera and each time I moved the camera for the player to find themselves within the screen again. And those few moments allowed or created confusion within the player. And again, having in a game like this where you're making quick decisions to jump, very, very last moment decisions to jump, having that few moments of confusion happen frequently and always be in a different place along the screen was horrible, to say the least. So I quickly discarded that particular idea, and I decided to go with, I still like the idea of flipping the camera, but what I didn't want was that long confusion that took place. So what I ultimately did is I removed the mechanic where it flipped 90 degrees. I set up so it only flipped 180 degrees. Always. It'll always flip 180 degrees. There's no 90-degree movement anymore. And that means there's no longer any requirement to have the cameras shift. So I didn't have to actually have that shift from a horizontal to a vertical play space. And that by itself made everything better. Now, it was still quite difficult. Having this sudden shift in your play was quite difficult, and I had to keep that in mind later on when I was balancing this game. The next thing I needed to think about was how the player was going to move. I needed to understand the metrics behind the movement, how high the character could jump, how much gravity, how fast the character was being pulled back towards the ground, how high the double jump was. Was the double jump twice as high as the jump, or was it less than a jump? I had to decide all this stuff. And understanding these metrics would then allow me to build the levels. And all the levels are going to be built procedurally, except for the initial portion in which I teach the player how to play the game. So that's the next thing I did, is I decided on the metrics. I decided that the player was moving rather than being stationary. The player moves along and moves within virtual space. They move along the x-axis to eventually move into far reaches of space, which means I needed the ability to remove objects as they left my view. So I decided on all of this stuff. I got the metrics working. I understood the jump, and I understood that the double jump was going to be less than the initial jump, so that your jump was going to be the highest, your double jump was going to give you that little extra boost to get to locations that you wanted to get to. Again, no narrative has been decided yet, nothing like that. I'm understanding the metrics of the game. Once I had that feeling good and I felt like the player was moving at the appropriate speed, I felt the player was jumping at the appropriate height, I felt the double jump was moving appropriately, and all of this was being done with the character as a simple collider, as a simple capsule, and the platforms themselves were simply cubes, not even cubes actually, they were simply rectangular sprites that were in space. So once I felt like all of this was working appropriately, I could then go through and add in my pickups and decide on that kind of thing. I decided on 2 simple pickups. I decided on a pickup that would make you go faster to increase the game itself, to increase the difficulty of the game. I decided that the metrics involved in the increase were only going to be slightly faster than that of the regular speed and would give you a boost over a very short period of time rather than be something that lasts forever. As you pick up this particular pickup, you go faster for a short period of time. And again, like I said, that changes the feel of the game slightly and randomizes how the players are playing the game. They can't get used to a constant jump distance if they are picking up these pickups that make them move faster, and these pickups that are causing that fast movement to cease at a particular point within the game. So I added that particular pickup in just to add a little bit of variety and to make it a little bit more difficult. I added in a second pickup that was strictly points. That's all it was it was going to be the ability to collect points. And the third pickup was that of the screen rotation. That's all I've got within this particular game. Those three pickups. So once those were in place, I randomized how they appeared on the screen. I randomized it each time. It's all procedure generated, just as the platforms themselves. So let's talk a little bit about level design and what kind of level design needs to go into something like a procedurally generated side-scroller. With a procedurally generated level that you would have in this type of game, or what I decided I'd have in this type of game, I knew that my level design would be based on the metrics. It was extremely important to have the metrics in place before I could consider any type of level design. I had to know precisely how far my character could jump, how fast they were moving at their slowest, how fast they were moving at their fastest, and I had to understand how high they could jump, how long they'd stay in the air, and whether they jumped or double jumped. So I had to know all of these things, and these ideas, these mechanics, are what defined my procedural level design. That said, I still needed to be able to teach my players how to play my game. So I started off, if we take a look, I can see that I've got myself here 5 different platforms. And I created these 5 platforms for a very particular reason. And for a particular manner. They're both created. They're created in both the top and the bottom camera. It's identical, these 5 platforms to begin with. And this is all the teaching that was required for my players. First of all, these platforms themselves are spaced appropriately to make jumping extremely easy. This first jump is an extremely easy jump. It teaches the player immediately how to jump. I started the player off on a long platform. This long platform allows my player to run unimpeded for a little while and understand where they are within the screen itself, understand what their abilities are, understand how fast they are moving. There are going to be some pickups along this particular platform. They are going to be randomly generated. I didn't set them up so that they were not. So there's randomly generated pickups there, and they may experience any of the mechanics that I've associated with those pickups as they run across this first platform. And again, the distribution of the pickups is such that the speed pickup and the flip pickup are rare compared to the points pickup. So more than likely the player is going to experience the points pickup within this first platform. They're going to very easily be able to make this first jump. And that's what I wanted to teach them. It doesn't take long to teach these mechanics. Push a button. This is a 1-button game. Push a button and your character will jump. Within this second area here, the second area allows me to teach the double jump. Now, the players are going to come across this shorter platform. They're going to see this shorter platform in front of them, and they're going to have to make a decision. So player choice here. I can either use what I've been taught and jump to that lower platform. The distance across this section, however, and the height differential between these two will require a double jump. Additionally, across here, a player can very easily make the double jump and go across these two larger platforms and entirely skip this smaller platform. So what I'm doing here is I'm requiring that my player utilizes the double jump to cross this space. Regardless of whether they decide to utilize the smaller platform or the larger platform, they are going to have to use a double jump at this particular time. It's not something that's easy to miss. This distance is not so great that it's not doable. A double jump across this distance is extremely doable. A double jump across this distance is extremely doable. But my players are forced to use a double jump. Those are the two main mechanics. So those are the two core mechanics within this particular game. That's all I really have to teach them to do in this level. Allowing them this much time, a handful of platforms, to actually figure out those two mechanics are extremely important. And that's all I had to do as far as level design. The remainder of the system, the remainder of the level itself is generated procedurally and is collected by a item that I have on the player that follows along behind the player and simply scoops up any of the existing platforms or any of the existing clouds. And that's it. That's all that there is in this particular game. Every time that one of the platforms moves into this collider here, this trigger, it generates another platform further along. And that's it. Ultimately, I had to decide what information that my players had to play the game. So let's talk a little bit about UI now. When it comes to UI, a lot of people go overboard on exactly what they do as far as their AI is concerned. As far as their UI is concerned. What they need to do is they really need to consider precisely what a player needs in order to be able to play a game. Anything else that you have on your screen, if it's not something that's immediately required to be able to go into and make decisions about your game, it's probably not something that you need to have immediately available on the screen. Ultimately, I decided that the players would need to know a couple of things about this particular game. I'd want them to see their communal score. I want them to see the fact that they're working together. So I created this simple UI that allows them to see their score as they collect the goods. And the score itself is animated. The image is animated so that every time that there's a score that's collected, the players then see this jump and they know that their score is increasing. You might ask, well, why do the players have to know their score in order to be able to play this game? In this particular case, as I've already mentioned, I decided that the only goal of this game was not distance traveled or anything else like that. It was going to simply be to beat an old high score. Knowing your high score is going to be displayed at the end of the game. Your current high score is displayed at the beginning of the game. So the players know what the current high score is, and having them have the score available immediately on the screen is going to allow them to make the decision of whether or not they're going to make that risky jump to try and get those extra points, or whether or not they're going to just simply keep going and rather than risk it at this very moment to try and beat that high score, they're going to just continue running. It also gives feedback immediately, constant feedback about player progression. This is also extremely important. Having a player understand that they're moving towards a goal and they're actually doing something is extremely important. So I actively decided to include the score on the screen at all times. The other thing I decided to include on the screen at all times was the player's health. I decided early on that the player was allowed to make 4 mistakes as far as pickups were concerned. So I mentioned that I had 3 pickups that would give for points or allow for mechanics. I added in a 4th pickup that was going to damage the player, so a hazard. They had to leap over the hazard or they would take damage from it. And ultimately, they can make 4 mistakes where they can run into it 4 times. I decided upon this after some gameplay and realizing that the game was a little bit too easy, that just jumping between platforms was a little bit too easy, and I wanted to cause the player or demand of the player that they utilize their jump more often during the game, utilizing that core mechanic more often. So the player can make 4 mistakes, and the game ends when both players are out of the game. So again, this is a cooperative game, but both players can keep on playing as long as they're able to. So if one person is out of the game, it doesn't affect the other person's ability to continue playing. So each of them can see their total hit points. In this particular, I made a particular decision to allow them to have 4 hit points, and it's displayed as a in quadrants, simply using an image that is a filled image and is broken up radially into 4 separate parts. So as the player takes damage, a quarter of the image becomes red each and every time as the players take damage. And that was the entirety of the UI. Nothing else had to go in here. I didn't need to show them anything else. I didn't need to show them how far they had gone. I didn't need to show anything else like that at all, because none of that was important as far as the decision making of the game itself was concerned. All they had to know is what their score was, whether or not they want to risk going for the high point score, or take the golden path along this procedurally generated level and play it safe. So that's ultimately all I had to do for UI. As I went through and built the rough prototype of each of these different ideas, I was able to play test it and see if I enjoyed it. Only after that point, once I understood that the prototype, the iterative prototype that I had created, was something that was fun to play, only after that did I go ahead and add the narrative to the game. This is when the narrative took place. And this is, in this particular case, obviously if you are building a narrative game, you have to understand the narrative of your game pretty early on. You have to understand the art and the aesthetic of your game very, very early on. Ultimately, I decided that I was going to create a game because my girls are kind of locked in place here. Ultimately, I decided to create a game that was going to be based on running outside and running and collecting flowers. So that's ultimately what my pickups were. My point pickups are flowers that look like this. There's several different versions of these flowers that they can pick up. Again, they are procedurally generated. As they pick up a flower, each flower was worth a certain number of points. The points, again, didn't matter at this time. You have to kind of decide on what score you're looking at for your players to have. I wanted it to be in the thousands somewhere. So these flowers are very, very frequent in nature. You can pick them up all the time. If you pick up a flower, I ultimately decided they were worth 10 points. And again, this is something that I played with to see what they were going to be worth. The second pickup, the golden apple. The golden apple is a pickup that's going to allow you to speed up. So if you pick up this golden apple, your character will go faster for a short period of time. It generates an apple particle system that comes off the player as the speed increases. So the pickup itself increases the difficulty of the game slightly. So I made it worth 20 points as opposed to the flower that's only worth 10. The cactuses themselves. Now, why did I decide on a cactus? Well, ultimately, I decided that the cactus was a good metaphor for this pandemic that we're going through. It's making everything difficult to touch. We can't go outside. The girls can't use any of the equipment that's outside in the parks and that kind of thing because they can't touch it. They're not supposed to go out, and all of the sports fields and everything are closed down, which is why I kind of decided on the platforms themselves being an outdoor type grassy thing and picking the flowers, so they're running through nature. I decided on the cactus to indicate, like I said, to be a metaphor for the pandemic. Touching it is going to hurt you. It's going to cause problems. So I've made the cactus a very large part of this game. The cactus itself is holding up each of my platforms, and it grows through the platforms and creates these additional hazards. These additional hazards that look like this, or look like this, or look like this. Are all in place. Oh, I have to fix this. That's why it's so easy to get across. Are all in place, and if you bang into them, then you lose one of your sections of your ability, of your health. So that's basically what I decided on as far as the narrative is concerned. An outdoor space, a grassy space, collecting flowers, collecting nature, these golden apples, but also being restricted by these horrible cactus that were going to harm you if you got too close. The last thing I included was this rotational pickup, and the rotational pickup itself is I went with a literal demonstration of what it was. I actually had a hard time coming up with an idea that would simply sell. Like, the iconography simply sells the idea that something's going to happen. It shows a flip here. I had a hard time coming up with an idea, especially in the short term that I had to build this game. I had a difficulty coming with the idea that would demonstrate something through nature that would show a twist of some kind. So I went with a very simple icon that demonstrated the idea that something was going to occur whenever you picked it up. So unlike the apple, which you hear a crunching noise whenever you pick it up, flower, you hear a swish swish noise as you run through the flowers. they are all simple in nature. This one here had to be something that was immediately recognizable to the player, so they knew something different was going to happen, especially something as big as this particular camera flip. When it came to balancing this game, again, I really had to decide exactly what it was that I wanted to do. When it came to the idea of balance, it was really, really important. Again, the apples and the flowers are very easy to pick up. There's no real risk in either one of them. There's no risk at all in the flowers. 10 points was fine. There was no extreme risk as far as the apples were concerned, so I made them slightly higher than the flowers. And in fact, not only was there only a slight risk involved, but the benefit was there as well. Moving faster would allow you to collect more points as you move through the level quicker. So both of those were kind of easy for me. When it came to the rotational pickup, something that drastically changed the camera and made the game far, far more difficult, it had to be something that made it worthwhile for the player. It had to be something that was extreme risk. You're taking extreme risk in picking up this pickup. You are confused for a moment. It takes you a while to adjust to the idea that your camera is upside down. You are now moving in the opposite direction. So ultimately, as far as the reward was concerned, I decided that 500 points for a rotational pickup. And I decided that after picking up a rotational pickup, you would automatically revert back to your original camera orientation after 7 seconds. So you're 7 seconds upside down, or maybe it's 6 seconds, I forget exactly now, upside down, and then afterwards it revolves. So it actually doesn't just flip instantly. It's not an instantaneous flip. That would cause more difficulties for our player. It's a rotation. So it rotates fairly quickly, but it rotates back into position. So it's not just an instantaneous change. You kind of get that moment of rotation where you're watching it switch, and then you can find yourself a little bit more easily. And again, I went with 500 points because it causes such a dramatic change in your game. The risk-reward value had to be worth it. And that's it, guys. That's what I ultimately built as far as a game for my girls are concerned. I'm going to try and build a couple more games, as depending on how long we're off. Hopefully we're not off too much longer. Hopefully things go back to normal for all of us very soon. But that's what I did. All right, I'm going to try and go back to my videos next week so that I've got some instructional videos rather than this type of video. But hopefully you found this interesting. Hopefully that you took something away from this particular video. Game design and game development are extremely difficult, and it can be really easy simply to jump into a game without putting any real thought process into it. I'm big on the thought process that goes into your games. I love the idea of taking a simple idea that you had in the past and giving it a twist, which is exactly what I did. Literally with this rotational pickup, I took a game that existed and I added one thing to make an entirely new game. And that's all it takes to make a game, guys. That's all it really takes to make a simple game. All right? Get out there and make some games. Prototype some ideas. Enjoy yourself during this horrible pandemic, and enjoy yourselves as best you can, confined in whatever space you've got. All right? Get creative, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, let me know down below with a thumbs up. If you didn't, a thumbs down is perfectly fine. I know this kind of video is not for everyone. All right, guys? Thumbs up, thumbs down, comments down below, and if you haven't done so, please take a few seconds to subscribe. Have yourselves a wonderful day, everyone.